This program is made possible in part by the Moving Image Trust Fund.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Sam Taggart timed it perfectly. His book, The Public's Health, A Narrative History of Health and Disease in Arkansas, came out with the 100th anniversary of the Arkansas Department of Health. Doctor, it's a splendid achievement and wonderful reading for every Arkansan. Public health in 1913, when the department was actually created, was more of a notion than it was a reality.
Yes, sir.
And scarcely a notion.
Yes, sir, it was. If you go back to the
public health as a discipline,
yes,
as
sir.
an endeavor, as a pursuit.
If you go back to the late 18th century, a process began of the evolution of a social contract related to the public's health because of yellow fever on the East Coast, on the Northeast Coast. And when you came west to the Trans-Mississippi, to the wilderness, okay, the social contract was
right.
your health and disease was your health and disease between you and your family. And if there happened to be a doctor around that you trusted, okay, you might go to him. But for the most part, the social contract was health and disease was an individual thing. The sanitary movement of the 19th century, they began to look at what happens when human beings congregate. And they were rediscovering things that people back in the Indian subcontinent knew 3,000 years earlier.
Right.
But they understood that when you contaminate the water, when you don't have clean water, when you can't take care of the sewage, people get sick. And the public health social contract began to change in the mid-19th century, really began to change. The germ theory that had been around in one version or another for 200 years really did not get validated and accepted until the 1860s. It didn't really get incorporated in Arkansas culture really until the beginning of the 20th century. And there were some places, and I'm sorry, you struck me off on a question here. There's some places where it really didn't take hold until the 1920s. The most important thing about public health and the germ theory was wash your hands, all right? There are clear examples of physicians. There's a Dr. Ryan from Thornton, okay, it's a wonderful little biography written by his family, that this is in the 1920s, Dr. Ryan would see a patient, he had a rag in his back of his pocket, he would take the rag out, wipe his hands, put the rag back in his pocket, okay, after each patient. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I do not believe this is apocryphal. Frances Sage Bradley said this, and I believe she was being honest. She was a infant and maternal health care person in the 20s in Arkansas. Said at one point that she had an old doctor from the country brag about the fact that he always washed his hands after the delivery. After the delivery. The social contract, especially for whites in Arkansas, really began to have some impetus in the late 1870s with the yellow fever epidemics. And there were temporary boards, there'd already been some temporary boards of health, but the Medical Society formed a board of health when the state wouldn't form one. Then when the national people formed a board of health, then the state decided they would form one because they could get some money for it. But those lasted for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And with the with the general acceptance of the germ theory, okay, with that most of these illnesses that we dealt with were infectious diseases that could be dealt with. That provided the impetus at the beginning of the 20th century, and 1909, 1910, for people like Morgan Smith and C.W. Garrison to help create the Board of Health, which became the Health Department.
We were really I'm thinking of another Arkansas author, D. Brown, who wrote in his memoir, when people waxed about the good old days, he snorted. Huh. In the good old days, meaning the early part of the 20th century, when people got sick, they died.
Yes.
Often.
And particularly if the doctor had to intervene.
Right, and you note also the infant mortality rate, even for white children, was through
right.
it was right. Utterly unacceptable by today's standards.
If you look at the life expectancy at the turn of the 20th century, it was about 46 years. Okay, there were obviously families who lived longer, probably like your family, families that lived longer. By the beginning of the 21st century, that number was 76. Okay. Of that 30 years, okay, a large percentage of that 30 years of improvement in life expectancy was on the front end. It was reducing infant mortality. Yes, sir. We were certainly in the 19th century, but even into the 20th century, we were messy. I mean, right. It wasn't true only of Arkansas or only of the South, but it was true especially of the South, the poor rural South. There was no clean water. Sewer systems were alien in many parts of the state. We had smallpox, we had polio, we had yellow fever. And cholera.
And
typhoid.
Right, and typhoid. It was a risky business, just living.
It certainly was.
What was the impetus, really? I mean, there was a lot of political resistance.
A lot.
Always. A lot of political resistance. And in fact, you quote some of the Arkansas Medical Society's positions, which are just, I have to say, they're just cringe-inducing
right.
today.
Right.
I mean, there were fears of socialism, mass immunizations approved. Right. That was socialistic.
Up through the 1960s. Okay, that was true. That was still going on, and the significant American Medical Association and the Arkansas Medical Society fought mass immunizations for people who could pay. They didn't worry about people who couldn't pay, but for people who couldn't pay, it was strictly money.
Was this a genteel? I have to ask, was this an attempt at genteel eugenics, whatever, or was it purely fiscal, financial?
I think it's financial. I think it's financial. It's financial more than anything else.
Oh. We owe women a lot.
Yes, absolutely.
A lot.
Absolutely.
You make this clear.
Oh, yes. And the longer I go at this and the more research I do on this next book we're working on, the more I realize how underplayed all of that really is. As you well know in the book, I talk about the Arkansas Federation of Women's Clubs and their role in constituency, in creating a constituency that would get things done. If it had not been for the American Federation of Women's Clubs, the Board of Health bill that was passed in 1913 would not have been signed by the governor. Joe T. Robinson was the governor at the time, and he was stalling, sitting it on his desk. The Arkansas Federation of Women's Club put together statewide petitions, okay, and presented them to his desk, okay, and said, here's what the women in the state feel like, okay?
P.S. They're suffrage now.
That's right, that's right. And it was just great fun. It's just great fun to read about them. You may know about Ida Jo Brooks. Yeah. Oh, she's this character of persistence and perseverance. And for the viewers who don't know, Ida Jo Brooks was the daughter of Joseph Brooks, Brooks-Baxter War, and they were fighting over nothing because there wasn't much, they didn't have any money. But she went to college. This is in the early 1870s. She went to college at Little Rock University. got a master's degree at Drury University in St. Louis, I believe, came back, helped start the Arkansas Teachers Association. This wasn't enough. She applied to go to the new medical school that was formed in 1880. They turned her down because she was a woman. So she goes to Boston and goes to medical school and comes back as a pediatrician. Okay, that wasn't enough. So she goes back to Boston or to the Northeast and becomes a psychiatrist. She becomes the first female to work at the Arkansas Insane Asylum. Okay, and
as it was then known.
As it was then known.
Yeah.
Then she went on to start working in the school systems. She along with the Arkansas Dental Association began doing programs for children's dental needs, special needs children, developmentally disabled children in the school systems in Pulaski County. When World War I started, she applied to go into the service. They turned her down because she was a woman, so she joined the U.S. Public Health Service. and she's just one of these fascinating people that you'd never hear about.
And she was not alone. I mean, as you make clear in the book, women were the front line. We're talking about nurses, midwives.
Right.
They were the front line. They were, in so many communities, the health care.
Really, and the other thing, one of the interesting things about it is if you look at that, we painted this picture, and it's true, of Arkansas not being a healthy. The words salubrious and insalubrious were used a lot at the beginning of the 19th century. Okay, insalubrious meaning unhealthy, and salubrious meaning healthy. Arkansas was never declared salubrious, with the exception of Hot Springs, and to some extent Eureka Springs. Those two places were thought of as salubrious places where you could go and take the healing baths and the healing waters. Whether that was in fact true or not, nobody really knows.
Geography enters into public health, at least in the early days of the public health establishment, and topography played into it.
Right. Oh, clearly. If you look at Arkansas in 1804, there were 365 Europeans, 65 slaves, and anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 indigenous people that we call Native Americans or American Indians. And that didn't grow a great deal for the first 20 years because of this great giant swamp that faced people as they were coming west. They were coming west from into the Trans-Mississippi. And because one of the things they would do when they came across that swamp in East Arkansas is they would get typhoid and they would get malaria. Okay, so the people of Arkansas originally came down from St. Louis, down the old military road, okay, down through Batesville or Polk Bayou, Cadron, Conway, Little Rock, Benton, and down on to Fulton, where Mexico started. And that's where the population centers grew. And the diseases, the malaria and typhoid, were primarily over in the eastern part of the state, plus the Arkansas River Valley going up, plus the Ouachita River coming up, and to some extent the Red River coming up as well.
It ought to surprise no one that, given the cultural slavery,
Right.
that the health care, as bad as it may have been, or spotty as it may have been, the health care afforded white Arkansans was vastly superior to that available to African Americans.
Right.
As reflected in the mortality tables, the infant mortality.
After the Civil War. Before the Civil War, and this is not a defense of slavery, but before the Civil War, the slaves were considered valuable property. A young female slave who could have children and could work in the field was worth about $1,500. One with tuberculosis or scrofula consumption, they didn't know tuberculosis back in those days, was worth $800. So half the value, because they knew she wasn't going to live very long. Civil War replaced slavery with second-class citizenship, peonage, Jim Crow, and violence. No rights, no education, and no health care. And that was true. That was pretty well true up until the 20s, at which time the public health the Arkansas Board of Health and the public health nurses began to penetrate into the poorer sections of the state, irregardless of whether they were black or white.
Often on a volunteer basis.
Right.
I mean, there was a lot.
And with no money.
Yeah.
No money.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that we would not have gone as far as we did at the time without either federal pressure, federal assistance, in terms of Washington aid?
Of course. Of course, you know, there were some interesting things. We go back to the time when the Arkansas Board of Health was formed. That was right in the middle of the progressive era. Okay, it was right in the middle of trying to personalize government, to create a situation where people were taken care of, and all of those things. All that money that came in had some strings attached with it. The Maternal and Infant Bureau that was started, the Children's Bureau that was started in the teens, the national one, was followed by one of the first significant bills in the National Congress after the women got the vote, was a Children's Bureau bill or Maternal and Infant Health Care bill that put tons of money into education, tons of money into services for both black and white children.
Let me go back to, if I may, to the political, to quote you directly, from its inception, the operations of the State Board of Health have been involved in the machinations of politics.
Oh, right. Sure.
And you note that it continued into, well, I would posit that it continues well into today. And part of this, I suspect, owes to not just the fear of socialism as sometimes, socialized medicine as it was sometimes presented, but it ran afoul too of, in times, religious values, spiritual values. From that, I guess that sprung from the definition, from the effort by some health professionals to broaden, to expand the definition of public health into teen pregnancy, gun violence, smoking, alcohol, drug abuse, auto safety.
The social contract for health care, for public health, and for health care has
obesity
continually changed. Yeah. Okay, and more as one issue is overwhelmed, then something else would come back on. One of the cute stories that I read, and I found this in the archives at the Met, talking about the creating the Board of Health, and part of the reason for creating the Board of Health in the 1911-1913 timeframe was the John D. Rockefeller Foundation was going to put money into the state to deal with hookworm and malaria. First hookworm and then malaria. And of course, just like with the germ theory, washing your hands is the most important tenet, okay? The most important tenet about hookworms is wear shoes, all right? Well, there was a large patent medicine and Christian scientists, the chiropractors, and a number of other people were concerned that this was a move by the medical doctors to take over medicine in Arkansas, okay? That's what this is all about, okay? Okay, that's what the concern was. And there was a rumor put forward by one of the legislatures that this whole business about hookworm, okay, was a strategy by the Brown Shoe Company out of St. Louis to sell shoes. Okay? And they tried to get the bill defeated. And in fact, the first time the bill for the Board of Health made it through, the bill got lost and didn't get signed correctly. And so they had to do it again in the next election. So there has been a constant political battle. There's been a constant political battle, or there was a constant battle. It's not that as much anymore in the Delta, related to both education and health care, relating to the people who worked on the farms, and that was a real problem.
Expand on that, if you will.
The planters
fought
fought it.
Plantation men.
They fought it. They fought anything that improved the quality of life for the people. During the flood and drought flood of 27 and the drought of 31, and then again the flood of 1937, the plantation owners were concerned, the large landowners were concerned that giving these two people too much aid and helping them too much would keep them from going back to the farm. And they fought it. And
so, in their estimation, improved public health, equal money. I mean,
right.
Yeah, loss of labor, What if we have, of course there'll be outbreaks periodically, but if we have turned the corner on so many diseases of the early 19th century, what are the challenges now?
Well, one thing I think you'd have to remember about those is, you ever had fire ants in your yard? Okay.
Not in,
Okay.
I'm familiar with it.
We have these nice manicured lawns
With a mound in it.
and the Terminix guys can keep the fire ants right to the edge of the lawn. They can't make them go away. Okay, so most of those illnesses are out there. Okay, René Dubose wrote in the 40s and 50s and 60s about the adaptation of living tissue, that bacteria adapt, that viruses adapt, and we know that clearly. We've seen that with AIDS, we've seen that with staph, we've seen that with methicillin-resistant staph that's in. So there is always going to be some. There's always going to be some catastrophic infectious illness out there on the periphery. Okay. The question to me is are we prepared for it? And generally we are. Generally we are. If you look at what's going on with Ebola right now, generally I think the CDC, which is a wonderful, I think it's I think CDC is probably the embodiment of what we need nationwide. Okay? What we've needed and what we have, and they've done a great deal to stop a lot of the things that we deal with. Very interesting, their work in Arkansas. But so will it work? Will their strategies work to deal with Ebola or MERS or any of these illnesses? Yeah, but it won't work fast enough. Okay, we'll have little outbreaks of this and here. The Rotary Club. I'm not a member of Rotary, but Rotary International has had a big thrust for years, and they put a lot of money into it in dealing with polio. Okay, and there's still little outbreaks going on around the world. They happen, they come, they clean up an area, then there's another area of polio jumps up over there.
Well, in seeking to broaden the definition of public health to include soda pop, soft drinks, oversized soft drinks, gun violence, your thoughts on that as a health professional? Are we biting off more than, are we broadening it too much too fast?
No, I think we're going about where the need is. I think that's what we're doing. We're going where the need is. James Baldwin, once said that our children never do what we tell them to do, but they almost always imitate us. Okay, in terms of obesity and smoking, blood pressure control, we have to make sure that we do. That we deal effectively as adults, as parents, and as grandparents, and so that we don't end up with a couple of generations of childhood obesity, which is could be a major problem for us, particularly in the South. And there are some suggestions that maybe that is turning around a little bit. There are some studies out of Mississippi that suggest that there may be some improvement in childhood obesity there based on supersizing, reducing drinks, reducing sweet-containing drinks, and that kind of thing.
We are a more mobile society than ever. People who, Arkansans who would have, for whom going to Missouri would have been a major trip 2 generations ago, now hop on a plane and spend a week in France or China. Obviously, there is some concern about the transnational nature of modern life that well, you mentioned Ebola, for example, or maybe I brought it, but is there a real concern among public health professionals that we are doing enough to guard, or is this against ailments that previously were relegated mostly or occurred mostly in foreign lands appearing here? Is there any cause for alarm here?
There are people in local health departments, state health departments, and national health departments all over this world, and specifically in the Western world, looking at that, sweating every day, thinking, what's next? Okay? And do we have the right tools to deal with it? And yeah, the answer is it a concern? Sure. Do we have the tools? Probably. Will it be fast enough? Probably not fast enough for everybody concerned.
Dr. Sam Taggart, author of The Public's Health, Narrative History of Health and Medicine in Arkansas. Thanks very much for your time. If you'd like to know a little bit more, please stand by, because we are going to continue our conversation on the AETN website. So for those of you who are watching on the air, thanks very much for joining us. Again, for more, go to the web. We'll be right back with that.
This program is made possible in part by the Moving Image Trust Fund.